Brian, go ahead.
Okay, so we'll get going. Obviously, Marnie will continue to let people in as they arrive, but we'll make a start. And I'd like to welcome our speaker for today, Dr. Jack Burston. He's an honorary research fellow at the Language Center of the Cyprus University of Technology. He's a specialist in theoretical and applied linguistics, second language acquisition and learning, and testing, computer-assisted language learning, foreign language software evaluation, and language center design. We also know him as an article reviewer for two eminent call journals, and he has previously served on the editorial board of the Calico Journal. He's also a veteran researcher into mobile-assisted language learning, being involved at the University of Cyprus MoBlank project, and he has a range of influential and frequently cited publications on MAL, cited by me, I know that for sure. He's a contributor to the Eurocall MAL SIG, including a presentation at the 2023 conference for the MAL SIG Symposium. And recently, he generously provided the Eurocall MAL SIG with a very comprehensive set of literature on the past 3 decades of mobile-assisted language learning research, comprising both a general and an annotated bibliography, both of which are available on the Eurocall MAL SIG website. And his talk today will navigate us through those 30 years of research and provide some recommendations for future directions of MAL research. Please welcome Dr. Jack Burston.
I have the floor. I do. Okay. Well, I'm going to be talking today about where MAL has been for the last 30 years and where it needs to be heading in the future. I'd like to begin with a bit of prehistory here, bringing your attention to the fact that the first commercial mobile phone appeared in 1983, and yet the first MAL publication did not appear until 1994. That's a whole decade between the emergence of the technology and signs of its effect on language teaching in the literature. Given the revolutionary potential of MAL, we have to ask the question, why did it take so long for MAL studies to appear? Now, they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Let's see how true that is to answer the question. This is what a mobile phone looked like in 1983. At the time, it cost $3,500 US, which in today's values would be over $11,000. So part of the reason why MAL was a decade in coming is the cost factor. Cost certainly was a very dissuasive factor. Also, the mobility of this device. It's called a mobile phone. In reality, this is not the sort of thing you could slide into a pocket or a purse. It weighed over a kilogram, 2.5 pounds. So you had to lug it around. It wasn't the sort of thing you could just toss around. And thirdly, of course, is the very limited technical affordances that it offered. It was just a telephone, period. So those are very powerful reasons why MAL did not appear in the 1980s. If we move ahead to the 90s, we can get a look at what a mobile phone was in those days, a decade later. Still expensive, but much less so than the first versions of the mobile phone. They could be had for less than $500, which in today's values would be about $1,000. They were truly portable. You could take these and slip them into your pocket or your purse. They still, of course, had the same limited technological affordances. It was just a telephone. Because of the cost involved, the funding, anybody who wanted to use a mobile phone would have to find the funding to purchase them, because students, of course, in the 90s did not have mobile phones at their disposition. And that's one of the reasons why, the primary reason why experimental mall studies only started to appear 5 or 6 years later. 1999 was the first published experimental mall study. Well, that gives you the background for the research. I want to take a look now at what in fact has happened since 1994 in general and 1999 for experimental studies in particular. This general mall bibliography from 1994 to 2024 is intentionally very broad in nature. It includes publications relating to all aspects of mobile-assisted language learning, written in any language and targeting any L2. I compiled it from other published small bibliographies, starting with my own in 2013. Also, I include references from over 200 published mall overviews and meta-analyses. And I did keyword searches in academic databases like Scopus, SSCI, ProQuest, and last but not least, a great deal of recursive bibliographical mining. That is, every time I found a new book, the first thing I would do was look at the references in its bibliography and then chase those up. And that was a repetitive process. Now, I hasten to add that I have not been able to consult all 6,100 of these studies. There are about 800 of them that I have not been able to obtain. And if I can just put in a little plea here along the way, if you use these bibliographies, and I encourage you to do so, and find references that don't have links to their sources, but you have links to those sources, by all means, please drop me a line and send me the reference so that I can update the bibliography. And if you happen to have copies of these references, then by all means, if you can, send me a copy. I'd love to add these to the bibliographies. The second bibliography, in fact, is extracted from the general mall bibliography, and it contains just the experimental studies. That's why it goes from 1999 to 2024. The first experimental studies appeared in 1999, and it includes 1,700 experimental studies. Of the 6,100, 1,700 of them are experimental studies. And they differ in one regard from the general bibliography because each one is accompanied by a 100-word synopsis. These studies all involve the application of mobile-based or mobile-accessible applications and or mobile device affordances, such as audio-video recording and picture-taking, note-taking. And of course, they all describe the teaching and learning of languages in a defined learning environment with specified participants and conditions and statistical analyses of the results. There's one omission that I hasten to mention, and that it concerns virtual reality studies. The experimental studies include augmented reality studies because these involve just the normal mobile devices, phones or whatever. Virtual reality studies, on the other hand, require special devices. You have to have special goggles or some other special technology to realize the virtual reality. And for that reason, I have not included virtual reality studies in the annotated experimental bibliography. They are, however, included in the general mall bibliography. So if you're interested in virtual reality mall studies, they're there for you to dig out. Let me also add just a little footnote here as to the reason, what it is that prompted me to make these mall bibliographies publicly available. especially over the last 5 years in reviewing articles that have been submitted for publication at various journals. I noted that I always go through the bibliographies, of course, and in going through the bibliographies of the submissions, I discovered that on average, about a third of the references that they cite that are in or that I cite in my bibliography are not in their the reference bibliography of the submissions. Uh, that's a lot. That's a big gap. And so I decided to make my bibliographies publicly available to help to fill that gap. Research, in fact, is only as good as the background knowledge. And you have to know it. The bibliographies tell you what's known, what is not known, what people agree upon, what they don't agree upon, what needs to be learned. And so I can't overemphasize the importance of reference bibliography in research. Let me now focus on these experimental studies over the last 25 years. And I'd like to very briefly talk about their distinguishing characteristics. The one thing that jumps out at you when you look at the bibliography, the general bibliography, and the experimental studies in particular, is the dominance of English as the L2. Of the 1,700 experimental studies, 1,500 of these, that's 87%, target English as the L2. The second most targeted language is Chinese, but that's second place, a very, very distant second place. There are only 56 out of the 1,700 studies that target Chinese. That's about 3%. Another notable characteristic of these studies is the L2 competence level of the learners. In about half of the cases, the competence level of the learners is either stated only very generally, like the students have had 3 or 4 years of prior study, or they are enrolled in the second semester or the fourth semester of German. Very vague indications of student competence levels. And in a lot of cases, the competence level of the learners isn't even mentioned. In the half of the studies that do specify properly the competence level of the learners, they are almost all beginner and intermediate level, more or less equally divided between beginner and intermediate. Advanced level learners, studies involving advanced learning students are notable by their absence. Less than percent of all experimental MAL studies involve advanced level learners, only 78 out of the 1,700. Other characteristics of these MAL studies is the focus on language practice as opposed to actual real language usage. Overall, in general, 38% of all of the activities are tutorial in nature. That is, they involve dictionary lookups and flashcards and oral repetition and completion exercises, translations, and rote learning. And among these exercises, by far, vocabulary is the major target. In nearly half of the cases, 42% of the cases, the language practice involves vocabulary. Now, this applies to advanced level learners as well as non-advanced learners. More than a quarter, 26% of all of the MAL activities in experimental studies are tutorial in nature. And more than a third of these focus on vocabulary. Very noticeable in these experimental studies is the very high overall success rate. MAL works. It may be focusing on tutorial exercises, but the success rate is very high overall, 87%. The success rate is high, but substantially less so with advanced learners. About 75% of the studies report positive learning outcomes. Aside from learning outcomes, a lot of the MAL studies, experimental MAL studies, also evaluate the student perceptions of MAL. And this is in the majority of cases, 57%, in fact, report of the studies report positive perceptions of MAL. Negative student perceptions of MAL are very rare. They're less than 2%. It's interesting that at advanced competence levels, the student reaction to MAL is even more positive. About 60% of the studies report positive results with no negative reactions. Also, not very frequently, but some of the experimental MAL studies also evaluate affective behavioral changes resulting from MAL implementations. That is, effects upon learning motivation, of study engagement, of liking the L2. And as with the general student perceptions of MAL, the affective changes that are brought about are in the majority positive. 57% of the studies report positive affective behavioral changes. The students are more motivated to learn. They like the language better, etc., with only 3% of these studies reporting negative outcomes. Again, advanced level learners are even more positive. 83% of the studies that involve advanced level learners report positive outcomes with no negative feedback. Given the documented positive outcomes of MAL and the strong student acceptance and the positive affective changes that MAL has brought about, all of this taken together begs a very important question. And that question has to do with to what extent and how has MAL actually been integrated into the curriculum. 15 years ago, Abdus and Camarena and Facer, this is in 2009, had this to say about curricular integration. They said that integrating mobile-assisted language learning, MAL, technology, that is personal, multimedia players, cell phones, handheld devices, into the foreign language curriculum is becoming commonplace in many secondary and higher education institutions. In reality, there is virtually no published research to substantiate this claim. Of the thousands, remember 6,100 MAL studies, only 5 target curricular integration, evaluating it between 2014 and 2023. Of these 5, I happen to be the one who wrote the first evaluation of curricular integration in 2014. It was a survey that I conducted with 70 respondents. They were all published MAL researchers. And basically the study was asking, following the research, what happened? Did your research lead to curricular integration? Only about half of the time was there a positive response. Yes, following my research, I then integrated MAL into the foreign language curriculum. of that half that responded integration of call, it's notable that about half of those, that is a quarter of the 70 respondents, indicated that yes, they integrated MAL into the curriculum, but only for one or two courses during the whole course. The other quarter, only the other quarter, indicated that they had really integrated MAL into a full course as opposed to just one or two classes during the school year. Chow, ETAL, 2 years after my survey, conducted their own survey of published MAL researchers. There's some overlap between the two, but I never saw the list of their respondents. So there would be some substantial differences between them, I think. But what's interesting is they came to very much the same conclusion, and that is that very little actual curricular integration resulted from their research. In 2020, Kasim and Saad published an article on curricular integration, but it only involved 7 English language high school teachers in Malaysia. And while the results attested to the advantages of that could be derived from MAL, the article itself gives no indication of the actual degree of MAL integration. More recently, there are 2 articles in 2023, one by Juchik and company and the other by Chen. The Juchik's study involved 121 English teachers primary school in Croatia. And overall, only 16%, 16% of the respondents indicated that they had incorporated MAL into their English language teaching curriculum. But again, no indication is given as to the extent of that integration or how they actually integrated MAL into the curriculum. Chen, very similarly, with 350 university English teachers in Taiwan, was concerned with the barriers preventing the integration of MAL into the curriculum. The very question, of course, of barriers to integration tells us that there must not be a very high level of integration, or you wouldn't be worried about what the barriers are. And again, as with the other studies, there's no indication of the actual degree of integration. As you can see, the question of MAL integration remains essentially unanswered. It's a very good research topic if anyone is interested in it, but it's going to require a large-scale survey and a serious team effort. Well, let me summarize now what MAL has been doing over the last 30 years or 25 years for experimental research. It's focused on L2 English as the target language. It's focused on beginning and intermediate competence levels. Advanced level is almost non-existent, less than 5%. It's very much influenced by behaviorist and structuralist inspired pedagogical theories. It focuses on language practice, tutorial exercises, especially targeting vocabulary, even at advanced levels. It is essentially substitutive in nature. That is, MAL is experimental MAL studies aim at replacing what has been done with text-based and fixed call-based language lab type materials. It's marked by very high learning outcome results, somewhat less so with advanced level students. Student reactions to MAL have generally been very positive, with negative reactions almost non-existent, and with advanced level students, totally non-existent. MAL has had very positive effects on learning motivation, on study engagement, but linking the L2 with negative reactions is almost non-existent. And the degree of actual MAL curricular integration and the manner in which MAL has been used in real language courses has yet to be determined. Well, having looked back 25 years here in experimental research, let's take a look now at the future of MAL and the need to move from substitutive to transformational MAL. In doing this, I'd like to begin with a MAL irony. For at least the past decade, the implementation of MAL has above all based on the exploitation of ubiquitously accessible smartphones, the interpersonal communication device of par excellence. And yet, experimental MAL has remained very much focused on language skills practice, reading, writing, speaking, listening, vocabulary, and grammar. The use of smartphones to promote interpersonal communication has been marginal at best. The future of MAL very much lies in the exploitation of mobile technology to support not just language practice, which at all competence levels has its place, but actual, real interpersonal language usage, communicative as opposed to tutorial MAL. Much more could and should and can be done with MAL, as Kukulskahum and Shield made clear in their evaluation of MAL in 2008. That study itself was reviewed by Goodwin Jones a couple of years later in 2011. And this is what he had to say about Kukulskahum's analysis of MAL in the decade following the first experimental MAL studies. And he said that for the most part, Kukulskahum and Shield pointed out that the uses of mobile devices were pedestrian. They were uncreative and repetitive and did not take advantage of the mobility, the peer connectivity, or advanced communication features of mobile devices. Most activities were teacher-led and scheduled, not leveraging the anytime, anyplace mobile environment. Oral interactions and learner collaboration were infrequently used. The problem is less one of hardware and software shortcomings and more in developers' conceptualization of how language learning could be enhanced in new, innovative ways with the assistance of mobile devices. Now, what Goodwin Jones said in 2011 is true and even more valid today than it was then. As Goodwin Jones made clear over a decade ago, the major constraints on MAL are pedagogical and not technological. To realize the full potential of MAL, its exploitation needs to be much more closely aligned with the tenets of current second language acquisition theory. Input-output hypothesis, interaction hypothesis, sociocultural theory. There's a need to systematically exploit mobile technology and most especially smartphones to promote authentic language usage through the use of personalized materials and engage learners in problem solving, knowledge construction, constructivist, interactionist, task-based language learning activities, language usage activities. Now, MAL cannot move in these directions on its own, but rather as an essential integrated part of an overall pedagogical approach that guides the entire curriculum. This is a very ambitious and demanding challenge, but it's one which is nonetheless entirely realizable. In fact, although rarely brought together in one study, the elements of this approach can readily be found scattered throughout published MAL literature. There are a few experimental studies that actually rise to the challenge and include all of these elements in one study. There's one in particular that merits our attention and recognition, and that's Ty's paper from 2012. This is an excellent example. If you haven't read it, by all means, it's in the references to this talk. Go find it and look at it. It's a very, very interesting paper. It can serve as an example of a model to follow of how the essential constituents of communicative MAL can be realized in an integrated, mutually supportive fashion. Now, this study was done using technology that would be considered obsolete by today's standards and fully confirming the points made by Goodwin Jones about hardware and software shortcomings not being the root cause of restricted, unimaginative exploitation of MAL. In Ty's study, it involved 35 beginning level L2 English 6th grade Taiwanese school children. And they were involved in solving an imaginary museum robbery using information that they collaboratively collected and disseminated via early model smartphones, which of course had to be bought and paid for and loaned to the students. The students investigated the crime that took place on site at a local museum where participants worked collaboratively in small groups with a, quote, foreign security agent who only spoke English. The crime scene evidence was collected by the students from physical inspection on site in the museum, from face-to-face interviews with people working in the museum, and also from the reference materials that were installed on the smartphones that they were using. The phones were also used to allow students to communicate with each other and to provide and obtain information and instructions. The children then returned to the classroom to compile their findings and identify the culprit. A post-treatment test of vocabulary and sentence structure demonstrated significant language improvement. And it's worth noting, too, that the children thoroughly identified the experience. All of the essential elements of communicative MAL are present in this study. Collaboration sets the groundwork for interpersonal communication, and interaction and problem solving is highly motivating and provides authentic topics of discussion and negotiation of meaning. Above all, Ty's study demonstrates that a communicative approach to MAL consistent with modern second language theory and practice is feasible even with young learners of limited L2 proficiency level. Now, of necessity, the activities in Ty's MAL implementation were very heavily scaffolded and teacher directed. Remember, he was working with sixth graders. And also taking students out of class would not be an option for many researchers and teachers, though on-campus excursions are certainly possible to the library or the cafeteria, the gym. These are all possibilities. And needless to say, the internet these days offers endless opportunities for virtual out-of-class visits. If this kind of MAL implementation could be done in 2012 with young A1 learners and the technology of the time, it could certainly be done today, at least as well, if not better, especially with older, more proficient language learners. I would strongly encourage you to give communicative MAL serious consideration in your future research, and even more so in the integration of MAL into your curriculum. Now, lastly, no discussion of future MAL would be complete without a consideration of how artificial intelligence is likely to affect it. AI has been attracting attention in experimental mall studies research since the first study appeared in 2017, with a marked upsurge since 2023. In fact, nearly two-thirds of all the AI-based mall experimental studies have appeared in the past 3 years. Now, as with experimental mall implementations in general, the primary focus of AI in foreign language teaching has been on structured practice. Of the 18 studies that have appeared since 2017, 14 of them, 78%, target only structured language practice. AI is used to personalize tutorial activities by dynamically adapting pedagogical content and difficulty level to the ongoing assessed performance of the learner. It is used to provide real-time correction and feedback. Of the 18 AI-based mall experimental studies, only 4 focus on dialogic interaction, the chatbot conversations. At an introductory level, these engage the learner in open-ended questions relating to personal topics such as friends and pets and vacations and favorite foods. One of these AI experimental mall studies, one and only one, that was Obari, Lambacher, and Kukurshi in 2020, focuses uniquely on task-based problem solving by using Alexa to help university students respond to everyday needs, assistance in cooking, weather reports, movie recommendations. Authentic interpersonal language usage linked to task-based problem solving is critical in L2 acquisition, but is very much subject to constraints of place and time. And this is precisely where greater exploitation of dialogically based AI mall has the greatest potential to have a transformational effect upon foreign language learning, especially at more advanced levels. Now, there's a major constraint affecting the ability of chatbots to carry on a coherent, meaningful, realistic conversation, and that's the information database upon which their operation depends. However, chatbots can effectively be used to engage students in content specific oral or written exchanges based on information prompts, a reading passage, a video, and audio, which provide the background information that the chatbot needs to carry on a realistic conversation. Initially, problem solving activities of students can be done on an individual basis. But the need to promote interpersonal interaction requires a follow-up stage where students work together in pairs or small groups to complete these task-based projects. They could be written oral summaries, class debates, artifact creation, audio, video clips, etc. Collaborative work can and should be done in person, in class, as well as remotely out of class, and using the most appropriate technologies. This may or may not involve mobile devices. We're not using mobile devices just to prove that the work can be done on them. That's in fact what happened in the early days of experimental mall studies. Laptops and desktops with their larger screens and physical keyboards offer a definite advantage when extensive writing is required or artifact creation like video, audio clips is involved. Initial searches can be undertaken on move up here, yep. Based on the factual details of prompt sources, it's possible for chatbots not only to maintain a conversation about the prompts, but they can also communicate to students related instructor-determined tasks. Students can then interact with in the L2 with web-based AI search engines like ChatGPT and find resources needed to complete problem-solving tasks. They need to compare notes of what they find and work together in pairs or small groups to complete task-based projects. AI definitely has a major role to play in the future development of MAL. However, to realize the full potential of MAL, the exploitation of AI will need to extend beyond the present domain of structured language practice. Dialogic-based AI application can and should provide increasing opportunities for authentic interpersonal communicative language usage as preparation for real-life in-person interactions. Questions, comments? Yes, Martin, you want to turn this over to anyone with questions?
Well, first of all, I would just like to say thank you very much, Dr. Burston, for this comprehensive review and indeed suggestions for the future. And I'd like to invite anyone to either put a comment into the chat or, of course, feel free to turn on your microphone and ask. And I'd like to start with one myself. I see Maria has her hand up. So in fact, Maria, of course, go ahead. My question can wait.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. Very informative always. I just wanted to ask something about transformational more. Was it transformational? I don't remember if this was the word, but could part of this transformational more be, analyzing student or like learner generated content, something that students actually produce from MAL integration?
Yes, definitely. What's behind all of this is knowledge creation of using the language. To learn the language, you have to use the language. And using the language, problem solving and knowledge creation is critical. So definitely working to construct knowledge is what makes it's an important part of this is the transformational aspect of MAL that I'm referring to here. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, and I think this would also add a more qualitative dimension, maybe, like to analyze what students actually produce. Because I'm not sure. I'm sure you can clarify this for us, but because most studies are quantitative. And maybe they, I don't know, focus more on the benefits, on the advantages. So I don't know if there is enough research on actually what the students produce.
No, there's not. And students working at this level are mostly working at more advanced levels. This is not the sort of thing you can do things. Obviously, Ty did with A1 level learners, but the real potential here is with more advanced level students. I would say also that colleagues who are teaching courses for specific purposes have a definite advantage because the content, the knowledge that the students are acquiring or building for themselves is very much related to the language for specific purposes. It could be tourism, it could be health, medicine, it could be transportation, whatever the special purpose is, gives a very natural meaningful area in which for the students can work. Very realistic, of course.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I'll just go back to my question. I think we have a comment or two in the chat, but I'll just ask mine first. One of the things that you mentioned that's been mentioned in lots of the research is that it's not technical limitations, it's pedagogical limitations and a persistence with rather boring MAL, to describe it in one way. in my own PhD, I tried to find out what it is that learners do when there's no one pressurizing them to use their smartphone. And what I found was that there was still a very clear reluctance to use the smartphone as a learning tool. They used it when they had to, but when they had an option not to do it, they tended not to do it. And a quote that came out, it ended up being, I think, part of a publication that I produced was, "For actual proper study, I wouldn't use my smartphone at all." And they have this kind of perception or these distinction between real learning, which was, it was almost grammar translation stuff in the Irish language, in the Irish university context, and what happens on a smartphone, which is kind of learning light. It's a bit fun and maybe something happens, but it's not real proper learning. I was wondering if you had any comment on.
Yeah, this is why problem-based problem solving is critical. It's an essential element. You use the smartphone willingly because it gives you ready access to the resources that you need in order to resolve the problem. So the trick here is embedding language learning in task-based problem solving activities. If students want to use a laptop or a desktop computer to do their research, fine. As I said, we're not using mobile devices just to use mobile devices, but certainly in the initial stages, when they're trying to find resources to help them solve and to communicate. Again, this is collaborative interaction. It's not individual knowledge building. It's collaborative knowledge building. And they certainly would use their smartphones to collaborate, to communicate with each other, to compare the results of what they're finding. So the trick here is using the smartphone for what it does best. You can use it to do research, ask questions in ChatGPT, and you certainly would want to use it if the task, the problem solving, involves communicative interaction, because here the smartphone comes into its own as the communication device, and they just happen to be learning the language while they're doing this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if there's any more questions, but I also wanted to thank you, Dr. Jack Burston, for your presentation today with the SIG. And I did want to let everybody know that I will be sending out certificates of participation. It just might take me a few days to get to those. So for everyone who's come to view the presentation, and the presentation has been recorded, which will be on the website as well.
Okay, and that would include the PowerPoint, because there are references at the end of the PowerPoint as well. Yeah, good, great, my pleasure.
We have a number of comments in the chat about just saying thank you very much for this very informative presentation. But also, Maria, you did have another question if you wanted to ask, or if you would rather I read it out for you.
No, I was just wondering because Jack mentioned before that there were questions to researchers after the research was completed as to whether MAL was actually integrated, and most of them said no. Yeah. So I'm just,
and when they said yes, it was mostly for one or two classes.
Yeah. So I'm curious as to why this is happening. What kind of barriers are they facing, and also is it mostly because we're talking about institutional barriers or individual barriers?
Well, the Chow article that I cited, it's in the reference, it focuses uniquely on barriers. So start by having a look at that article with respect to barriers. That's what it's all about. But this also underlines the need. As I said, we know very little about the integration of MAL into the curriculum. There are 5 studies out of 6,000 over the last 25 years. If you're looking for a research topic, by all means, this one is wide open. And it's a very good question. Why? I suspect that there's much less integration of mall going on than the researcher would lead you to believe. You read the research; it's very positive, positive outcomes, positive student reactions, and you would just assume that, given the all these positive elements associated with mall, as they said in 2009, it's commonplace in high schools and institutions of higher learning. We don't know that. If it is, well, you're going to have to prove it. And if it's not, as you say, looking at barriers is an important part of finding out what's going on and why it's going on. It's certainly not because of the technology. As Ty's article showed, a decade ago, more than a decade ago, can you imagine using smartphones 13 years ago and doing research with it? The problem is not hardware and software. The problem is obviously pedagogical. Grammar translation, language practice as opposed to language usage. As I said, this is what has to change. It's not just the mall, not just the technology, it's the pedagogy that has to change. Yeah. And think of interesting ways to use the technology to generate language usage and get away from, you can't get away entirely from practice, especially at beginner intermediate levels. You need to practice, you need these exercises, but you've got to move away from that and increasingly towards language usage as the level of student competence increases. By the time you get to B2, C1 level, my suggestion is that the language pedagogy should be approaching 100% language usage. They shouldn't be need to do vocabulary translation exercises at that stage,
Thank you.
Okay.
Can I just ask one more question? Because I have a student, a Chinese PhD student who arrived back from China just a few weeks ago. And she has been doing some classroom observations about the use of technology in general. And she took some photographs of the inside of a university classroom. And up on the wall, they now have a series of about 50 little boxes or pigeonholes. And when students come into the room, the first thing they have to do is put their smartphones into these pigeonholes, and then they can take them away when they leave the class. In fact, she told me that some bring 2 smartphones just so that they can, very kind of ostentatiously place one in the pigeonhole and then carry on. But I think it's indicative of a broader trend of when people talk about coal, they don't really often include smartphones in that. Smartphones are sometimes seen as certainly in the classroom a negative influence, and perhaps even socially. And I'm just wondering, how do we, I guess we're all smartphone advocates to at least some degree here, how do we argue for this kind of research or this kind of practice when, as a society, we are seeing a certain strong degree of pushback against the use of smartphones, certainly with younger children and in primary, secondary schools?
Well, that's entirely justifiable in terms of the disruptive potential. The question should be not whether you could use smartphones in class, but for what purpose. And the trick there is to link them to language learning activities. They may be communicating in small groups with a chatbot, for example. That's fine. You've got to be able to demonstrate the positive language learning uses of smartphones in class. And bringing into class with the smartphones things that they have collected out of class, because the construction of knowledge very much depends upon context sensitivity, the real world outside, and you're using mobile devices to do that because only mobile devices allow that degree of flexibility to get out and go to the park or go to the museum and photograph, interview people about topics. And if you bring those back to the class and students are using their smartphones to play back the interview or to show the video that they made relating to this problem that they're trying to solve, that makes all the difference.
Yes, thank you very much for that answer. Okay, Marnie, I think that we have had our chances to ask our questions, and I think we've commented on the chat. And I thank you, Bruce, for your compliment. Again, he's thanking you, Jack, for a very insightful presentation, and pleased that we managed to put on this webinar. As are we. We're very pleased for you to agree to present, and thank you to the audience for joining us. I think we are probably at the end, Marnie.
Yes, I believe so. Again, I would also like to thank everyone for their attendance today. And
before I go, let me teach one bit of Greek while we're online. Καλό
okay, go
Sábado.
ahead.
Yes, Καλό Sábado Kyriako. Have a nice weekend.
Thank
Okay,
you.
I should have written that on my PowerPoint.
Okay, have a wonderful weekend, everybody.
Okay,
Thank you all. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Burston.
my pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.